On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at welcome back to JLF's Brave New World. This series that has brought you conversations with a stellar list of authors, philosophers, scientists, doctors, and academicians, including Margaret Atwood, Oran Pamuk, Jhumpa Lahiri, Peter Carey, Stephen Greenblatt, Professors Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, able to receive over 4 million views and a cumulative 29 million impressions. Today's session is presented in partnership with the delegation of the European Union to India, the European Union Prize for Literature, Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session of the day is Things That Fall from the Sky. Selja Ahava in conversation with Anu Singh Choudhary. The inventive Finnish author Selja Ahava takes our viewers through her prolific career spanning from scriptwriting for film, TV, and radio to her EU prize-winning novel, Things That Fall from the Sky. Her work for the screen has influenced her craft. In conversation with fellow author and scriptwriter Anu Singh Choudhary, Ahava explores the creative impulse behind her work and the spaces from which her story in London, to her husband's sudden disappearance, to all of the sky's bewildering falling objects. Selja Ahava is an author and scriptwriter from Finland. Her novel, Things That Fall from the Sky, explores the unexpected and inexplicable nature of reality. Winner of the European Union Prize for Literature in 2016, its translation rights have been sold to 25 territories, and the English version was published in 2019. 2 weeks ago, she's published her new novel. An award-winning journalist, Anu Singh Choudhary, is an author, translator, and screenwriter. Other than translating over 20 books into Hindi, including authors such as Namita Gokhale, Perumal Murugan, and Paulo Coelho, she's also written Neela Scarf, anthology of short stories, the memoir Mamma Ki Diary, and the novel Bhali Ladkiyan, Buri Ladkiyan, and is now also known as the co-writer of the blockbuster series Arya, one of the most watched Indian shows of 2020 on an OTT platform. All our sessions, as you are aware, are available to view on our Facebook page, JLF Lit Fest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Lit Fest, JLF. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, channel Jaipur Lit Fest, JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there and we'll be right back on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, Things That Fall from the Sky. Selja Ahava in conversation with Anu Singh Choudhary. Over to you, Anu and Selja.
Thank you so much, Sanjoy. And thank you so much, Selja, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Before we start our conversation today, let me just present certain trivia from India. As per an official data, 2,357 deaths happened in India because of lightning last year. And then there are several natural and man-made causes for such unfortunate events. So things indeed fall from the sky, especially tragedies. So that brings me to the first question, Selja. Your award-winning novel, Things That Fall from the Sky, is about this young girl, whose mother is killed by a block of ice that falls from the sky. As you explore this story of grief and loss and death through the passage of time, is there a higher meaning that you're seeking? Tell us more about your novel and the purpose of this particular story.
Things That Fall from the Sky tells the story of Sarah, who is 8 years old in the beginning of the book, and she lives with her parents. And on a normal summer morning, when she's away with her father, and her mother is doing gardening in the back of the house, in the garden, a block of ice comes up from an airplane that's flying in the sky and falls and hits the mother in the head and shatters her skull and she dies. And this sets off the story. And Sarah and her father really struggle to manage with the loss and the sudden event that doesn't seem to have any meaning or make any sense. Sarah's father is so he sort of sinks into the grief and doesn't really can't really hold the adult role with the little girl, and Sarah is left very much alone. And this Sarah story is then combined with other stories. Sarah's auntie wins the lottery jackpot, which is a good an unexpected event. She sorts her life out and buys the house she's wanted and everything. But then she wins the lottery jackpot a second time. And somehow this goes beyond the explicable reason of chance that somebody always wins the lottery, but she just doesn't understand how it can be that she wins it twice. And then there's a third narration line, which is a Scottish fisherman who gets hit by lightning several times in his life. And in the end, he gets hit for the fifth time and dies eventually. But so all these characters kind of share the same question, that how to continue life. Like, what was the meaning of this event? How do I explain this to me? And how do I live from this moment onwards?
Your writing seems to be really, whatever little that I have read, including this novel, is always seeking that explanation of what happened, that event which is beyond one's control, which is inexplicable, which is just so unpredictable and sudden that you don't even have time to process it. And you're constantly seeking that explanation in order to move on. Do we always need that explanation? Where is that need coming from?
I think we want to perceive our life in that sort of way, that it is a meaningful narrative, that there's a purpose for it. And I think the reality is that there isn't one. But I think it is just for mental health reason. We need one. But I also do think that there are events that don't really, that you can't really put into the meaningful frame.
Yes.
And they stay raw. And like Sarah's father, or Sarah says about her father, that there's a painful image that goes into his brain like a nail and stays there. And whenever he goes back to that image, it's always present tense, that he can't put it in the past tense, and that it doesn't heal, that it's always there.
Yeah, and it is Sarah's voice, in fact, which makes the narrative so much more. I mean, you really, because you're looking at it from Sarah's point of view, you're completely drawn by this innocent child, like this 8-year-old's understanding of the world and how she's seeing grief. Is there a particular reason why you chose the child's perspective to be the primary narrative for this? Because this must have been the toughest, while you had two very strong other parallel narratives also going on. Choosing the child's narrative must have really been very difficult.
I think it was one of the starting points for me when I started writing this novel, that I was interested in having a child character combined with really big questions, like really big, serious issues. And in some ways, I think we are all kind of on the same level. When the questions are big enough, I don't think an adult is any wiser. I think in this book, Sarah copes pretty well compared to many of the adults. But also I love the way children are quite flexible in their
yes,
and they can they are still learning about the world, whereas we are often fixed to presume that things go in certain ways, but children are so incredibly flexible that you know, they just go along as the world teaches them. And I somehow wanted to have this element in the narrator.
And this is very interesting, Selja, because it looks like what we adults tend to keep giving structure to our thoughts and what's happening in our lives. And it is irrespective of cultures and where we are coming from. It's such a human thing to do. In one of the interviews, in fact, you said that you were interested in looking for those structures in the world, which doesn't have one. It's coming from a child's perspective, which could be abstract. So I am actually taking this question of need of seeking structures to something that you also do. Otherwise, you're training as a script writing. So do you think this need to understanding structures within life and within narratives comes from the training and practice as a script writer? Because I also write for a screen, and this is the first thing that you're taught, that there has to be a structure to the narrative.
Yeah. Yes. It definitely comes from my drama background, and you're right in saying that it is something that we focus on and we become aware of when we are training in drama, and I'm not sure is that well taught or discussed in the literature side of things.
Right.
But drama. So it was part of my training to, you know, draw maps and draw kind of visualize the structure, and also that become aware that every structure bears a meaning or kind of content with it, that it's not content free how you choose to structure your story, and it makes a huge impact. Also, that the reader or the viewer, just by watching television and films and this sort of stuff, we are educated to expect certain kind of plot.
Structure. 3-act structure, 5-act structure.
Yeah. And we feel when something happens in the wrong place, for instance. And I think these are fascinating moments. And I think this goes back to Sarah's problem as well, that you can't kill a main character in the beginning of the story. That if you do, then you know the reader is totally lost. Like, why? What was that? Where does this story go now? And this is what Sarah tries to solve in the at the end of the book.
And this is a whodunit of a completely different kind, which is whodunit of understanding in terms of the things which are beyond our understanding, which is destiny, which is God in a certain sense, which are things beyond our control. I know you may not have a very clear answer to that, but I'm still taking the liberty of asking this because I'm really curious to know. Having written extensively for different formats, do you feel that there is a particular format which is closest to your voice?
Yes. Well, the last few years I've focused on writing prose. Writing literature, and I guess the two main differences between drama and prose is that in literature you have the narrator voice, and in drama you don't have one, and then the other thing is that drama is very much based on the plot and telling things through action. Like if in a book, I could say the man was desperate, but in drama, I have to think that, okay, a desperate man, how does a desperate man act? Like what sort of action would describe he's desperate? And sometimes,
that's the key word that we keep hearing all the time.
Yeah. And sometimes it's really kind of frustrating, that I have to put so much effort in coming up with these actions. Whereas when I'm writing a book, I could just say that he was desperate. But then again, sometimes you witness events or kind of moments between people that they have that act, they have that juxtaposition and confrontation that immediately invites drama writing, and then that's the better way of telling.
Yeah, and then there's this whole aspect of collaboration, which is another aspect. You feel more in control
Exactly.
when you're
Yes.
writing prose, and that's
Yes.
one whole lot of another conversation. But Selja,
True.
you're also fairly bilingual, and my the understanding of Finnish is that you probably have like about 5 million readers in Finland, while English would have allowed you to reach out to a wider reader base. And yet you choose to write in your native language. So if you could tell us more about your relationship with the native language vis-a-vis English as a writer.
Yes. Well, first of all, I don't really consider myself bilingual. I mean, I have children who are bilingual because their other parent is English. But so we have had English as our second home language, and I've lived in Britain for 5 years. But I still live in the Finnish language. And of course, on the other hand, I mean, every language is limited. That is part of its nature, that we try to use this limited tool to describe this reality that's limitless. And there's always this tension or struggle in that attempt. I'm very interested in, and I think that struggle is there even when I'm using Finnish. How to say this undescribable thing with these limited words that I have. But so I prefer to write in Finnish and just trust a translator. But of course, that is a question of having to just trust in somebody else's professionalism.
Yeah, and you've been translated into 25 languages.
Yes, and also, of course, the English translation is the only one that I can have any opinion on. Everything else is out of my hands completely. And I have to say that the collaboration with the English translators was very, very rewarding. I really, because there's so much when it comes to fiction translation, there's so much more there than just translating the meaning of the words. There's the melody and sounds and rhythm and feely touchy things, and to be able to kind of communicate those sort of things to the translator and then see them changing the text is really fascinating and kind of
gratifying,
trust building. Yeah.
Extremely. And that brings me to another aspect of your creative journey, which is how you experiment with spaces and narratives, and you combine text and spaces and performances, bringing in all your practice of not just literature but also drama and various other art forms that you practice, which to my mind is anyway you're going beyond structure. So so what are the old structures that you're trying to break down, and the stories that you're looking always from the little excerpts that I read of your other novel also, that you're looking for stories in between the events amid all this random absurdity of life. So if you could talk about this interesting experiment that you did do with spaces, narratives, and spaces in between. How do you put performance into play for all of this interplay to happen?
I think when I've been experimenting with space and text, I think that comes from the fact that whatever you say, you leave some things unsaid. So there's a space between the lines. There's something that didn't get defined, and so the text, when you then combine text with images, or you lay the text in space, then that visual spatial presentation of the text brings meaning to the text. And I think this is it's kind of been my way into a bit of poetry in a way. I think I would have loved to write poetry, because there's so much about this in poetry.
Your prose is very, very poetic, I have to say.
Yes, but it still functions as a sort of prose text, and somehow it just fascinates me how poetry can kind of open up space inside the lines or between the lines. So I guess that's somehow what I've been trying to play with when I've used other formats. And then also, like, going back to literature, and the breaking down structures, I think, like, what I've been struggling with and having to do with my drama background as well, is the sort of classical Aristotelian structure of one mission, one main character,
hero's journey,
one mystery, and then everything, and then the end, where everything is explained and nothing is left unrevealed. And this is also in the book that Sara sort of realizes that her story as it is now doesn't fit this format, that format is useless if she tries to find a kind of narrative line, a meaning for her story, and that she has to come up with something else.
And that actually fits the life so beautifully. There is no such format, there is no such box in which life can be fixed, and there's no structure to it.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the other novel that I had an opportunity to read an excerpt of, which was really fascinating, Before My Husband Disappears. Where did this novel come from? It just feels so personal, and it comes from it. It really indeed seems very, very personal. Sense.
Before My Husband Disappears tells a story about a couple who have been living together for 10 years, who are married. And then one day, the husband says that he has actually always wanted to be a woman. And that, so his trans identity is something that he hasn't been able to face or share with anyone, but he's now reached the point where it can't be hidden anymore. And then the book describes what happens after that sentence in the next about half a year, 1 year, and how, and it's described from the woman's, the partner's perspective. So it's a loss of her, it's a process of loss for her, a loss of the man, loss of the relationship, and also loss of what she thought was there, or what. And I think this is what the book deals with, that so many of the things that we kind of, the foundations that we build our
world
They are just assumptions. They are not truth, and that sometimes there are moments when we realize that one of these foundations was wrong, and you kind of have to remap everything, draw a new map, so the story is then combined with the story of Christopher Columbus,
Yes.
who was using a Marco Polo's map of the east coast of China as he was looking for India, and he was navigating with that map on the east coast of America, and I found it deeply moving and fascinating how he was able to navigate and kind of follow the map while he was sailing along the islands of Central America, and that it's somehow so convincing that when we think this is true, we interpret the reality based on that, and never realize that it wasn't like that.
But it's interesting how remapping is a theme across your works, and that adds so much of, for a lack of a better word, positivity, optimism, this zest for life, hope to the characters, even though the story is of grief, loss, and despair. So that remapping just continues to be a theme even through things that fall from the sky. Remapping. Now that we're talking about remapping, I just wonder how you're remapping your creative process and writing through the last 6 months that have been particularly revolutionary, unique in that sense for us. We know that your new novel has also come out. So, what has been the creative process like? What is was the book? Was your new novel a part of that churning out and remapping that was happening during this process?
Well, luckily, I had nearly finished the script when the lockdown started and the homeschooling started, so I didn't have to balance this domestic challenge.
The real challenge, yes.
Yeah.
Of every mother.
But of course, well, I guess in many ways, very little has, from my simply personal side of things, very little has changed. I live in a bit of a lockdown setup anyway. I work from home. I don't have colleagues. I don't have, work canteen, and I don't have a regular income either. So my life is pretty uncertain and free, but uncertain in many ways anyway. So in that sense, I was mentally well prepared. But of course, this affects everything, and
Selja, this sense of freedom and resilience actually comes through your writing. This sense of even solitude, which actually leads to especially things that fall from the sky, which is such a profound story of grief. It's just that's when you realize that the what has been your, like you saying, normal state is such a boon to have. But how does a collaboration work if suppose you're working on a script or something? Because as a screenwriter, at least I can speak from where I come from, we collaborate a lot. So there is always this constant interaction happening with the director, even table readings happening with actors. So how does that work for you?
Yeah, it works online at the moment. Yeah.
We wouldn't have met if there was no COVID and this situation. We would have probably met at Jaipur physically, but yeah. But this also, if you could tell us more about the new novel that has come.
The new novel is called The Woman Who Loved Insects, and it talks about, well, it tells about metamorphosis. The idea, it's based on a true life character from the 17th century Germany, who she was a naturalist and an artist, and she was the first person who documented the 4 stages of butterfly metamorphosis. In a time when insects were still considered impure and bad omen, and generally thought that they are created from dirt or mud and so forth. But she's a woman who's interested in change, in the possibility of change in nature and in the world. And so the book starts off with this historical character, but then she metamorphoses herself. So she goes into a cocoon as she joins a religious sect, and then breaks out 200 years later. So all in all, she lives for 370 years. So she jumps in time, and she explores the Japanese insect life, which is very rich and interesting. And then we move on to the last part, which takes place in modern, like contemporary Germany, and to the world where insects are dying. And yes, so this is in short.
That you are reaching the boundaries in so many ways, in such a lovely metaphor to have in the current context, the times that we're living in. So there's so many boundaries that are being broken here. Will this book also be available? Is the translation happening? Will be
at the moment, Things That Fall from the Sky is the only one that has come out in English. I hope my other work will follow.
And Selja, I have one more question, and I'm really curious to know what Selja means.
Selja comes from Cecilia. So we have in Finnish, we have Selja and Silja coming from Cecilia. And Selja also means the elderberry berry. So that's the plant. And my surname, Ahava, means a harsh sea wind. Like sailors have Ahava face, meaning that they have this red, hard skin. But also in Hebrew, it means love.
How lovely.
Which is a lovely coincidence.
And so Selja, how it is spelled in India also has, so we have Shailaja, in fact, which is Shailja, which is actually the one who's very, very strong, like, the daughter of the mountains, the one who's the goddess from the mountains. So
I love that.
Yes, there's that connection here.
Thank you. Oh.
And there are a few questions that are coming our way. So allow me to please ask those questions, the audience's questions, which are coming from Facebook. Ria wants to know, what is your opinion on your work being translated? Has there been anything lost in translation per se? Such a good question.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something lost in the English translation to do with the child's voice. It doesn't feel quite the same, like she. But I can't define exactly what it is. But the language that Sarah uses in the original is quite well thought, and I think all the details of that are not, they don't translate.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Sun wants to know, how does the author sustain suspense throughout the story? That's a tough one to answer.
So say that again.
How does the author sustain suspense through the story?
Oh, that's a good one. Suspense. Yes. I'm not sure I'm very good with that though.
Maybe your drama training will come handy here.
Yeah, editing is important. And I think that is a quality that you learn when you learn drama writing. So often things are just too long. And also a lot can be done when you put two scenes together that create tension between them. So the suspense or tension doesn't always have to be in the scene. It can also be between scenes or in that kind of setup. But then also it's a question of what is said and what is left out. What has. So often when I write, I write, and then the second round I take off lines certain, and it, as the text kind of becomes denser, it improves.
Yes, and it is always said that writing actually always happens in rewrites.
Yes.
Ahana has a question. She wants to know, do you feel like your style of writing is impacted by your playwriting background? Is there a difference in the language you would use as an author versus a playwright?
Yes, there is a difference in language. Like drama often uses more daily. If it's spoken language, then especially in Finnish, where actually the kind of literary language is one that nobody speaks. So there's a lot of dialects, and so if you want to write lines that sound natural, spoken language, then you can't use the formal written literary language.
Interestingly, it's the same with Hindi, the language in which I write. The formal language, which is what we often use for prose, even though, like how you were also pointing out, sometimes with our limited vocabulary of the native language, it becomes formal, and that's something I also often struggle with, because as a prose writer, you tend to let the language take you through the journey of the characters, whereas when one is writing drama, scripts, for example, it has to be very precise and succinct and less descriptive.
Yeah.
So it's always about writing to show and not to tell, whereas prose is about telling,
Yes.
revealing, showing, also stream of consciousness kind of writing.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers Ahana's question. There's a very interesting question coming from Sanya, who wants to know if you could please share your book recommendations from European literature.
Oh, oh, that's a hard one, but let me think. Well, I'm just going to list some of my favorites. Imre Kertész has written about the Second World War, and
this is a Finnish author.
No, Imre Kertész, he's Hungarian, I believe. Lived in Germany, but very powerful work. I have a very soft spot for Samuel Beckett. He struggles with the limits of language more than anybody. I love his prose and I love his short plays. Of Finnish authors, I would recommend Rosa Liksom, who has been translated widely into English, and she's really, she comes from Lapland. She's very original. Oh, it'll be interesting to hear how she comes across in India. But yes, so her name is Rosa Liksom.
I hope Sanya is noting down all these names. And there is another interesting question that's coming for Aruna, who wants to know, and maybe you could actually combine both the answers. And what books from your childhood have inspired you? Have you suggested any of these to your children?
Well, a Swedish children's author, Astrid Lingard, comes to my mind. She's the woman who's written Pippi Longstocking and so forth. But she's got several really good and touching books, and emotionally really, really challenging. I mean, so she's got... I often think that those sort of books couldn't be written anymore because the children in those books are put into such difficult positions. But she's got a lovely book called Ronja, the robber's daughter, which has a female leading character, a girl who's really independent and strong-minded, and such an amazing, girl character that I loved her, and I used to play her in the woods and build tents and have my bow and arrow, and I loved reading that to my daughter as well. And I think it's a book that does good for any girl. Every girl should read it.
Yeah, and allow me to just ask another question as a fellow mother. Do you really think, because you said that the characters from those books which were written years ago by what became classic children's literature, all the protagonists came from very difficult situations? Do you also grapple with this thing that our children, the generation that we're raising, is actually a generation of privileges, and they will never know what difficult situations are like, and therefore we may not have that kind of resilience which we saw in the characters that we were reading when we were growing up? Do you also?
That's a really good point.
Although sad, all about that.
There's like Astrid Lingard has another book called My Brother the Lionheart, and it basically, I didn't even understand it as a child, but basically it starts off with the big brother committing a suicide, and it's the sort of thing that I'm not sure you could put in a book anymore, but the way it's been told and the reasoning behind it is understandable and respectable, but I could very easily nowadays see somebody saying that no, that's not healthy and healthy example.
Yes.
But in some ways, the book, what comes across from her books is that she really respects and trusts children as readers,
and consider them intelligent and mature in that sense. And there's another question which is coming from Kaushal Modi, who wants to know if your work have transcendental notes about life. That's quite a profound question, actually. To be.
Say that again. If my work
does your work have transcendental notes about life? Transcendental notes about life. Does it transcend
my life or
life in general? Because you write about. My sense is that it's coming from the conversation that we had on things that fall from the sky, which is about death, about loss, grief. So maybe that's...
The latest book, The Woman Who Loved Insects, has, because she was has an element, it has God in it. God speaks to her and follows her through her life. And I really struggled with this because I don't think God is something that that's very trendy in contemporary literature. But because I started off with this true life character from the 17th century, Christianity was everywhere.
Yes.
It was everywhere. So and she was a religious woman, so I couldn't really do without God. I mean, she's discussing a lot of the mystery of the beginning of life and creation and so forth, and then God just decided to follow her as she lived through the centuries. And then the second part of the book takes place in late 19th century. So it's the era after Darwin. And the whole question between science and religion is set up in a new way. So
in that sense, yes, it does transcend not just life, the question of life and death, but era, passage of time, and religion in that sense. And we would have wanted this conversation to carry on, Selja, forever. It was lovely talking to you about your work, and we hope to read the translation soon. Thank you so much for your time and being so candid and warm about your creative process and about your work. Thank you, Selja.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Anu Singh Choudhary, and thank you, Selja, for that beautiful conversation. And like you rightly said, the artist's life is so insecure at this point of time. And if you're not able to do something, artists are not being able to eat, not just where you are, but across the world. I think that's one thing that we continue to reiterate to folks who believe that the arts needs no support. The artists do need support, writers and everybody involved needs support. But thank you for this beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing your work. We were actually, Anu, and we were hoping that you would read from some of the translation or from your new work. But maybe we need to invite you back again to be able to do that. Absolutely. And for us, this is really a wonderful, special occasion, because this is the first of our series which will feature writers from across the European Union, and of course, writers who have won the European Union Prize for Literature. So congratulations on that. And we're very thankful that both of you were in this conversation with us. And to all our viewers, thank you. It was presented in partnership of the European Union to India, the European Union Prize for Literature, Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and you will log right back at 8:30 p.m. for our JLF Brave New World Season 1 Redux session, Library of Exile, Edmund de Waal in conversation with Aanchal. Edmund de Waal is going to be talking about his current project, the Library of Exile, that he created as a space to sit and read and be. It houses more than 2,000 books in translation written by exiled authors. See you at 8:30 p.m.